I have the opportunity to conduct pilot seminars at FBOs and avionics shops all over the country. Recently, those seminars have focused on the GNS 430 and 530, the hottest products in avionics. Today, we're going to take that same seminar and put it in video format. Of course, we'll do a little bit of flying, but the majority is going to be right here on the simulator. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff in this video, but you'll still need to refer to the manual for more information. But so much for the pre-flight. Let's get started. First thing we want to do is look at the NavCom portion of this box. Basically, if you separate the screen and just look at the left half of it, that's a NavCom, straightforward like anything you've used in the past. Right here, we've got our COM box. There's our standby and active frequency. Here's our flip-flop between standby and active. And here's our COM volume. Down here, we've got our VOR frequencies and our flip-flop between standby and active. To change the frequency, simply turn the big knob, changes big numbers, little knob, little numbers, and flip it into the active. Now, since we only have one control knob to change both the VOR and the COM side of the box, we reach down here, push in the middle of the knob, it drops the cursor highlighter down. See it dropping down to the VOR portion? Now I can change a VOR frequency and flip it into active or standby. You won't do that very often. When you're really flying this box, 90% of the time you're on GPS, except when you're doing like a localizer or an ILS approach. And in those cases, you're going to see later on, we tune it for you automatically. And also one other thing to note is on the volume controls, instead of pulling to break ident, you push to break the ident on it or to break squelch. Also on the sides right here are front-loaded data cards. Every month when you get your new JEP data, the little handle just pulls out and you pull it straight out of the unit. Now if we look down here at the bottom, you see our CDI selector. Now that's telling us what are we going to display over here on the HSI. Is it going to be GPS navigation there or VOR navigation there? So here's your selector. And this will interface with a standard OBS indicator or an HSI, but it is required for the installation. Now that we've covered the NavCom portion of it, let's get into the good stuff, the GPS side of this box, and this is where it shines. First thing, if you're following along with your simulator, I'm starting out in Wichita, Kansas, identifier as ICT. You can go to the options bar on top of the screen and go to initialize position, and now with the inner cursor, you'll scroll in your letters. We put K in front of a 3-letter identifier for an airport. Outer knob does your cursor position, and we're going to India, Charlie, Tango. Now that's what's fantastic with this simulator. You can put in your home identifier, and it'll have the unit sitting at your home airport, and you can practice approaches that you do in real life. So now I've got the unit sitting in Wichita, Kansas, and if we zoom down, you'll be able to see actually down to the runway layout. And what I'm pressing here is the range key. There's upper or lower and upper, and down here in the bottom corner it says what scale we're on. Right now we're a 5-mile scale top to bottom. Right now we're sitting in Wichita, Kansas, and we're going to fly up to Johnson County Executive Airport in Olathe, Kansas. This is going to be an exciting flight across Kansas. Going to love it. So the first thing we want to do, we want to go direct to that airport. So you press direct to. Now with the little knob, we do our letters. Again, we start out with a K since we're going to a 3-letter identifier. Now the outer knob does our cursor position, and we're going to go to Oscar, Juliet, Charlie. So I do my O, J, C. There it is. And it's nice also, if you look below, it tells me it's Johnson County Executive, Olathe, Kansas, so I know I've entered the right identifier. I press enter once, and activate is highlighted. Press enter again, and we're going there. So right now you can look down the right-hand side here. We're going to OJC. It's 54 degrees on our heading. It's 146 nautical miles, and now we don't have any ground speed because we're just sitting on the ground. That's all you need to know to get started. I've shown you the NavCom, how it works. You learn how to do a direct to. You can start flying with the box. But let's get into a little bit more of how it's laid out. If you look down here, it says nav, and you see these little blocks past there. It looks like a little CDI. It's not. It's a page index. Notice when I move my knob and change pages, the little block moves with it. So basically, right here, this is nav, and the number 1 block is highlighted, so that's nav page 1. It's a CDI page. If I take my little knob, click one to the right, there's my map page. That's nav page 2. Then nav page 3 is my frequency page. I guarantee you, I do 75, 80, probably more than that, % of my flying is on those 3 pages. Everything else is kind of additional information. So this is our page layout. Now, I was saying we're like in the nav chapter. Now, to change chapters, you turn the outer knob. So here's our waypoint pages. And again, the little knob will do the individual pages. The outer knob does the chapter. Waypoint pages are like opening up a flight directory. It just gives me information about that airport, the runway lengths, the runway layout, what approaches they have. If I click the big knob again, the next chapter is my aux pages. That's more your setups, your fuel planning, true airspeed, density, altitude. Do you want things to be statute miles an hour, nautical miles an hour, those types of things. Kind of more your bells and whistle pages. And the last page is an important one. That's your nearest airports page. So if we look, it'll have your 9 nearest airports. So if you have an emergency, you'll see here, it's a hard stop. If you spin that knob all the way to the right, it'll give you your nearest airport. So that's important to remember. One other hint is right here, the clear key. Underneath it, it says default nav. What that means is anytime you're lost in a page or a menu, you hold the clear key down for 2 seconds, it takes you back to nav page 1. So no matter where you are, what you're looking at or doing, hold that clear key down. It's your get out of jail free card. Sometimes it's the quickest back way to your home base, but believe me, that one's an important one. Now let's start flying this trip, and I'll show you some of the ways that I would use it. We're sitting here at Wichita. Well, what's the first thing we need to do? Well, we need to get ATIS and ground and all that good stuff. So, like I was showing just a minute ago, we go to nav page 3, take the inner knob 1 click over from the map, and now in the middle of the right-hand knob is a cursor. I push it, see the highlight dropped up on top? Now with the big knob, I can scroll down my list. And that's something you'll hear me say probably quite a bit through this video, is use the big knob to scroll down list. Some lists will let you do the middle inner knob, but most of the time, if you get in the habit of the outer knob, it's always going to work on every page that you're in. It's consistent with the unit. So we turned on our cursor, we scrolled down, we highlighted ATIS, and it's 2515. I press enter. Notice it dropped it over here in my standby comm frequency. Now I can flip it into active. So now I'm listening to ATIS. And when I pressed enter, it also dropped it down to my next frequency. So I'm ready. I want clearance delivery. I press enter. I've got clearance delivery. I'm talking to them. Now I want to go ahead and get ground in there. I'm getting ready to taxi out, so I've got ground in there, and I'm going to go ahead and get tower preloaded. So taxiing out from an airport, use this page. This is not any type of gimmick at all. Get used to it. That's one of the neat things of having your GPS and your radios combined in the same box. When you're done, I can turn the cursor off, and now with the little knob, scroll back my page, and I'm sitting back on the map page. Again, if I'd ever gotten lost, hold that clear key down, would have taken me back to nav page 1. So we're sitting here at Wichita, I'm getting ready, I've got ground in there, I'm talking to them, I'm getting ready to taxi out. One thing I do quite a bit is at larger airports, I'll go ahead and zoom in on the map. We don't show taxiways, but if they sit there and say, okay, you're going to taxi out to runway 14, well, right here is a runway diagram and how it's laid out. This is a big benefit. So let's say we've taxied out and we're ready to go. We're taking off, so I'm going to zoom out here, and there's a 35-mile scale. If you come down here in the simulator, we've got a throttle. All I do is click the mouse on it and drag it up, and it starts giving me speed. We'll start out at, how fast do we want to go? We'll start out at 162 knots.
Mini 430 Golf, right turn on approved, runway 17 clear for takeoff.
Clear to go, 430 Golf.
So we're flying up to Olathe, Kansas now. Something else I could do is I could click over one page, I could look at my main nav screen, and I'll show some of the things on this page right now. Right here, this is what we call our CDI page, because the main thing on it is our CDI needle. At the corner you see it say 5.0. That means full deflection of my CDI needle is 5 miles. When we get in a terminal stage of flight, usually within 30 miles of an airport, that'll go down to a 1 mile full deflection. And when you're shooting an instrument approach, it goes down to a 3rd mile full deflection. So that's our CDI, and it tells us right here we're going direct OJC. And you'll notice some of the information here in the data fields. It's 144 nautical miles. Our course is 54 degrees, and our bearing straight to the station is also 54 degrees. At this speed, estimated time en route is 53 minutes and 26 seconds now, dwindling down. If I turn my knob over to the map page, I can see myself as I'm flying along. The neat thing that our maps do, basically anything you see on this map, you can point to it and find out more information about it. And this is a fantastic feature. I'm zooming in here. You'll notice I've got roads and streets and highways and airspace, all kinds of things. Right here on the right-hand cursor on the map page, you push it, a little arrow dropped out. It was basically hidden inside the airplane. Now with the knobs, kind of etch-a-sketch style, you can pan around. The big knob will go right and left and the little knob up and down and point to things. This is one thing that is easier to do on the actual unit that is a simulator. Let's see here. I want to see what this road is beneath me. I point to it. You can see there, it drops up. That's Interstate 35. I'll drop down. I see a road over here. And it pops up. That's 81. Now I can zoom out. It centers wherever I'm at. I can also put my cursor inside airspace. Notice the airspace. Well, there's the river. Notice the airspace. See it highlighted in dark green? If I press enter, it says, do I want to review airspace? Yes, so I press enter. And it tells me that's Wichita Class C. That's a 2,700 to 5,300 foot of the airspace. And it is sectorized with that. I might see, fly along, and I want to see what this airport is up here. I move my cursor up. That's showing the 5 mile ring. That's highlighting the VOR at that airport. There's the airport identifier. Notice also when I'm panning and moving the cursor up here in the upper left, it says 155 degrees, 5.5 miles. That's my distance to where I'm pointing to. So if I'm flying a trip, I can point to a VOR. Now I know my distance from that VOR, so if I'm calling up ATC and want to give a position report. Again, just like on the other with the airspace, I press enter, it'll tell me what it is. It tells me that's McConnell Air Force Base, Wichita, Kansas, and their elevation. If I want more information on that airport, you'll see here in the upper right-hand corner, the done is flashing, the cursor's on. If I turn the cursor off, and with the little knob, I can get the rest of the information pages on that airport, including runways and frequencies. This is something else I use quite a bit. I'll be flying a trip, and I know you're above a cloud deck, and you want to find out what the weather is on the ground. I'll just pan up to airports that are close to me and go to their frequency page, and I'll pick up their ASOS or their ATIS so I can listen to the weather. Handy little thing. Now when I'm done, press the clear key. Clear is kind of the same thing as quit. It backs you out of menus. And I'm back to where I was panning around the map. So now, if I push in on the cursor, it puts basically the airplane back in the middle of the map, and I tucked it away back to bed inside the airplane. So you can see here, anything I see, you can touch and find out more information about it. Something else on the map, let's say we were looking at all that airspace, I really didn't care about the roads right now. We've got what's called a quick declutter with the clear key. You're on the map page, you press clear once, it takes off all the roads. Notice here on the map scale, it says 15 nautical miles, and I've got 1 level of declutter. There's 3 levels. I press clear again, it takes off airspace. I press it again, and it just keeps my active route in there. So when I'm shooting approaches, I'll usually declutter everything else off. I don't care. I don't want to see all the other clutter. But when you're on a cross country, it's nice to see those things. You press clear one more time, and it cycles back on. So it's just 1, 2, 3, and back on with the quick declutter. Now you can also go into the menu key and change what scale you want roads and things to appear on a more individual scale to it. And we'll get back into that a little bit later on. So we're taking our trip up to OJC, and it's we're still 133 nautical miles away. Now I'm about halfway through my flight. If you look down here, my ground speed, I've got about 150 knots. Earlier I was doing 162. These are the headwinds I normally encounter, so I'm trying to make this as realistic as possible. So I'm about 67 miles out from OJC, but I'm looking up ahead and I see some clouds in the sky. You know, I think I want to check with flight service, see what the weather's going to be. So what I can do is spin the big knob all the way to the right, and that again has that hard stop on my nearest list. First thing I have is my nearest airports, but we also have, besides nearest, intersections, NDBs, intersections, all that fun stuff, is our center frequency and flight service. So I'm going to go ahead and give Wichita Flight Service a call, see what the weather is. Again, on that right-hand knob, I press it in, get the cursor highlighted. If I want the frequency, I can take that big knob, scroll down, again that big knob scrolling, 122.3, highlight it, press enter. Now I've got flight service in there. I'm going to go ahead and give them a call. And I should get good reception because notice here, it shows the bearing and distance from where I am to the transmitter site. So I'm just 11 miles away from where their transmitter site is. And if I didn't want the nearest one, when I have the flight service highlighted, I can take my little knob and scroll through and look at the nearest 5 frequencies for flight service. So I give them a call. Yeah, there's a big cloud bank and everything. I'm not going to enjoy the scenery of Kansas now. So I'm going to end up getting in the clouds. So I want to go ahead and file a flight plan with them. Now I want to go ahead and get a hold of center. If I turn off my cursor, I can go back a page, and there's my center frequency for the sector I'm in. I don't have to go to charts, dig it out, or anything else. Just on my nearest list, go down again. I can highlight the frequency in 120.2. And I go ahead and tune it in. Now I'm talking to Kansas City Center. So I'm squared away. I'm done. I'm just going to hold that clear key down again so it takes me back to nav page 1. And we'll start getting prepared for doing an approach. Now we're just a little over 20 miles out from Executive Airport, and what's the first thing we want to do? We want to check ATIS. I probably would have done that closer to 40 or 50 miles out, but I go over to the frequency page. Notice the frequencies now are at my destination airport. It flipped over once you take off from your departure airport. So all I have to do again is turn on my cursor, big highlight, I press enter. There's 1935. I get ATIS. I was still talking to center. I'm going to go ahead and get approach control preloaded up. So it has all the frequencies now in order of arrival. Now we come back here. We've listened to ATIS, and winds are out in the north. Ceilings are 500 feet, so they're going to do the localizer runway 36. So we're going to shoot an approach. What's an approach? It's a procedure. That's what's the beautiful thing with the 430 is you got a key that says procedure. First thing comes up is select approach. Yeah, it knew what I wanted to do, so I press enter. Now it's asking which approach I want to do. Notice it lists all approaches there, not just GPS approaches. What we're going to do is we'll show the ILS and the localizers, but you're using the VOR portion of the box for primary nav, but it's still mapped out on the GPS. Then if you look at these other approaches down here, you'll see GPS scribbled after, like on the GPS 3.6. That means we would fly that approach with the GPS portion of the box. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and do the localizer 3.6. That's what ATIS said to expect. So I press enter. Now, are we going to get vectored onto it, or are we going to fly the whole procedure? Well, we're in a radar environment, so the controller's going to give us vectors onto the final approach course. So what we'll do is take the final approach fix and map out the inbound of that course, so you can see exactly how you're coming in on it. So we're going to do vectors to final in this case. Now it's asking us if we want to load it or activate it. Well, we're out here 20 miles still. The controllers haven't given you any vectors yet, or they haven't cleared you for the approach. Just like you would do, well, before GPS, you listened to ATIS. What'd you do? You went ahead and tuned your standby frequencies in. You went ahead and got the marker beacons on, put an NDB in if it had it. You got everything set up as soon as possible, so when it gets busy, you're not behind the airplane. We'll let you do the same thing here. We'll let you preload it. I'm still way out here. I can get everything set up so when it gets busy, I only have a couple button pushes. Now, if I'd been cleared for the approach, I would go down here and I would activate it, whether they give me the first vector or clear me for it. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and preload it, and that's what I do in real life most of the time. You press enter. Now it comes up, since we're shooting a localizer approach, or even if you're shooting an ILS approach, with a little disclaimer saying, hey, the GPS is basically supplemental navigation. So this little remark makes the lawyers happy. We press enter, and if you look over here on the localizer portion, it just tuned the localizer frequency for us automatically, 1083. Now we come over here to the flight plan, and you can see up here at the top, we're still going direct to OJC, but we got the approach sitting down here in a buffer zone, just waiting to be activated. Now if I press flight plan, it takes me out of the flight plan and puts me back on the moving map. Now we'd slow down a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and speed it up. We'll get up to about 110 knots now. And we're coming into OJC. All of a sudden, when the controller gives me the first vector, it says Mooney 430 Golf, turn right heading 090, vectors for the localizer runway 36. What would you do in real life in the airplane? Either you turn the airplane to 090 or take the heading bug in the autopilot. So in this case, we just drag our heading bug over to 090. And how you do that is just click on the heading icon, and if you move back and forth, it moves the heading bug. And I go to my autopilot, and I'm going to fly in heading mode. So now we're turning the airplane to 090. We haven't had to touch the box yet. The only thing you have to do with the 430 is go procedure, and it says activate vectors to final. Enter. That's it. We've done all the work now. Everything else is just fly along and follow the picture. Something that I had mentioned earlier is that I like to declutter the map when I'm shooting an approach. Well, let's go ahead and do that. Again, with the clear key, I'm going to go to 3 levels of declutter. And I can see what's going on. In the olden days, all you saw was what's on the HSI. That's it. That's the information you knew about this approach. Now let's look at what we're showing. We're going to the final approach fix. I'm always going to have DME and distance to the final approach fix. The desired track, 356. Well, that's my course inbound. That's what this magenta line is. So I could set my HSI to 356 without ever having to pull out an approach plate. Distance, I know I'm 15.8 miles out from the final approach fix. And my ground speed, I'm doing 110 knots. Something else I really look at when I'm shooting an approach is right over here too on nav page 1. This is my CDI, which I explained earlier, but notice it's fully deflected and it says 15 miles there. That means I'm 15 miles from intercepting the localizer. I know how far from the center course I am. Before, you never knew that distance, so you're guessing on what to do speed-wise. Well, I'm 15 miles out and I'm in a simulator, so why don't I go ahead and do it at 300 knots, get close to that to come inbound to kind of speed things up a little bit. And you can see our estimated time en route increasing. So I'm 14 miles out now from intercepting the localizer. That's the distance between here, and I'm 13.8 out from the final approach fix. So I can see they're running me on a base leg and when to expect to turn final. And here in a couple minutes, we'll get our turn inbound. Now we're getting closer in. I'm going to go ahead and look at my cross track here. I'm 6 miles out. So if I was 6 miles out from intercepting localizer, I'd probably slow down a little bit from 300 knots. And let's go down to about 130 knots. But I knew that. I knew how far out I was from intercepting it. I didn't know that before. You can't imagine until you've flown with the 430 what peace of mind that is. I believe it is a safety feature. Knowing exactly where you're at, you don't get that feeling of where am I. If they're going to run you through the localizer, at least you know it ahead of time. You see it coming up. So we just fly in. We're 6.5 miles out from her. Let's say they say turn 10 degrees left to 080. I'm just in the simulator going to turn my 10 degrees to the left. Come over here, look at my nav page 1. I'm 4.5 miles out from intercepting. I've usually found if by about, a mile and a half they haven't given you a turn in to final, they're going to blow you through the localizer. But again, you're prepared for it. You know exactly what's happening. The other neat thing with this unit is, if we were doing this approach, and it was on, this was the GPS approach in, we would have loaded it, and flown it the same way. I can't emphasize that enough. Every approach is treated the exact same way in this box. The neat thing too that you'll see that you won't find in the simulator is, If you forgot to switch over your CDI button to VLOC, it'll do it automatically for you about a mile from intercepting the localizer. This we can't simulate here, but you do see it in the real airplane. So we'll not let you forget to put the right indicator on your HSI or your OBS. So we're about 2.5 miles out from intercepting. You can see that right here. Look over here on the left side, it shows 1.0. That's what our full deflection of the CDI is. So once we get 1 mile, you'll start seeing the CDI needle coming in. But we're coming in, now they tell me turn heading 030, you're cleared for the localizer 36 approach, you're 4.5 miles from Herb.
Mooney 30 golf, turn left heading 020 and intercept the localizer.
020 to intercept, 430 golf.
So at this point, you just come in and intercept it and fly it like any other approach. The neat thing is, we just give you this visual graphic and your distances. So we're flying along in this approach, we're coming into it. I'd go ahead and couple nav back up on my autopilot. Just like you do in the real airplane, you do on the simulator. So now it'll do its own intercept. We're 3.5 miles out, you can see the needle starting to come in. Again, in the real airplane, this would be on localizer. I'm gonna go ahead and push it in localizer for our indicator for the simulator purposes. And we just follow what it does, just center up. We're 3 miles out, 133 knots. And before, you didn't always know that distance to your final approach fix. Now you do. Once we get at 2 miles out from the final approach fix, on a localizer approach, our CDI scaling will go down to 0.3, a third mile sensitivity. And if this was a GPS approach, it would say GPS active over here. This is a localizer. You're flying it like you do a normal localizer. You just get the additional graphics. And I can zoom in here on it and see how we're coming in. We're a mile out. Now what are we going to do at the final approach fix? You're going to go ahead and get the airplane slowed up. You're going to drop the gear and then go down to your MDA. This is what else is neat with this box. We're getting ready to cross. Right before we cross, it'll show your next course line. Well, in this case, it's straight on, 356. You go ahead, drop the gear. Notice the magenta line just shifted to our next leg of flight. And the distance here. That distance is to the end of the runway. Every approach in this box goes down to 0 DME. So you're not sitting there thinking that, okay, at 5.6 DME, or you might not have distance to it. So instead of guessing on a time when you're going to go missed, well, right here, we've got the distance to it. So in 4 miles, we'll be at the end of the runway. And this is a real benefit. You're coming down, you break out of the clouds, visibilities are poor. Look down there and say, okay, I still got a couple miles. They're saying visibility is about 1.5 miles. Well, it gives you a good idea how far out to look and where to expect things, which you didn't have that situational awareness before. And we're coming in, you're flying like a normal approach, just keep that needle centered. Now we're getting a little closer, we're a couple miles out from the end of the runway. I can zoom in. I could also have the unit auto zoom as we get closer to the airport expand, and I'll show that when we talk about some menu options after this. The one thing you're gonna see is when we hit the missed approach point, you're gonna wanna go out to the missed approach hold. And it's not going to sequence automatically to the missed approach hold point because most procedures are climb straight ahead to a certain altitude, then turn and intercept the course or go direct to that waypoint. So once we hit the missed approach point, you're going to see a little light come up above the OBS key that says suspend. And we're real close to seeing that. We're coming up. Okay, getting ready to go missed. Boom. See the suspend light. So we climb to whatever the altitude is, and this way it gives you still centerline navigation. I'd go ahead and change back to GPS navigation when I'm going missed, and on the suspend light, press the OBS key, and it'll release you and sequence you to the next waypoint, which in this case is a holding pattern. And this is neat too. What it's going to do is take you up to the hold. Right before you get to the hold, it'll tell you what kind of entry to do into it, and then just follow the diagram. You'll notice a little pictorial on our map. Well, that's based on a 1-minute holding pattern. If I'm going out and I'm doing, 160 knots, it's going to be bigger than the guy in a Cessna 150 going 85 knots. The pictorial we show on this is actually scales based on your ground speed. So basically fly the diagram, you're going to come real close to a beautiful holding pattern. Again, I'm going to go ahead and move my heading bug over to about 30 degrees from my hold intercept. There it tells me to hold parallel. Since I'm straight on, you could do parallel or teardrop. Personally, I would teardrop it on this holding pattern. Once you get there, again, the holding pattern goes magenta. I would go to heading bug on my autopilot and turn it outbound. Now let's get the scenario. They say, Mooney 430 Golf, let's go ahead and, what's your intentions? You say, I want to go ahead and shoot the 3.6 again. All right, they're going to start vectoring you around again. They say turn heading 240, vectors for the 3.6 approach. You turn to heading 240. Now to reset up the same approach we just did, all you have to do is go procedure and enter. And if we look here, zoom it out, it set the approach up just like it was when we came in. Let's start over now with a different scenario. Let's say this isn't a good day, Kansas City approach radar is down, and we're going to have to go fly the full procedure. With the GNS 430, this won't be a problem. We do the same thing we did before. We're going to fly an approach, and approach is a procedure, so press procedure key, select approach, enter. We want to do the same approach, localizer 3.6, but this case, we're not going to have controllers to vector us onto it. We've got to go out to the initial approach fix. Notice it's even labeled in magenta, IA. I press enter. It gives us the same question. Do we want to load it or activate it? Let's say they haven't cleared us for the approach yet, so we're just going to preload it. Same disclaimer. Everything happened just the same way. Look over here, 1083 is on our standby. I'd go ahead and put it up to active. We're still flying direct to the airport, but we have the approach down here in a buffer zone waiting to be activated. So I press flight plan, gets me back onto the map. Now we're flying along, just tooling along here at 115 knots, and wait for those magic words. Mooney 430 Golf, you're cleared for the localizer 3.6, your own transition. Boy, this is going to be fun. I just go procedure, and it says activate approach, enter. Again, at that point, I'm done having to play with the GNS 430. Everything else is going to happen automatically. Personally, I like to declutter the map so I can see everything that's going on. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a scale. You're going to see we're going to fly out here to the initial approach fix, and you'll see it coming out. I'll go ahead and zoom out. Initial fix. It's going to automatically give us our outbound. We're going to go outbound. It's going to tell us when to do our procedure turn. When we turn inbound, it's automatically going to lay in our inbound course. And when we turn inbound, it's also, on the real unit, not the simulator, it would switch it over to localizer, take us to the final fix and down to the missed approach point. Again, that's the beauty of this box. Once you activate it, you're done. You're not flipping knobs, putting a lot of buttons. So let's just fly along and watch as it goes. Now we're approaching up on Herb. You can see here we're about 4 miles out. The next thing we're going to see is a thing called turn anticipation, and this is slick. Look down here at the nav area. You're going to start seeing next desired track flash up there. Then it's going to tell you turn to whatever that next course is. If you start a nice standard rate turn at that point, it'll give you a smooth intercept to your outbound course. So we just fly along and do what the box tells you. Where you're going to have the most problems with this box is if you try to make things more complicated than they are. Let everything happen itself. Let it sequence. Something else you'll notice that I changed on this round was the auto course zoom. Notice as it gets closer in, it's zooming in. And again, I'll show that later on in the video, how to do that yourselves. But we're coming in. We're 2.5 miles out, doing 127 knots. And in a few minutes, we're about 1.5 miles, it's going to tell us what our outbound course is and tell us when to turn to our outbound course. There's our next desired track, 176 degrees. And it's approximately 15 seconds before you need to start the turn. It starts flashing that. Now turn to 176 degrees. So that's my outbound. And if you're coupled to an autopilot, you can turn your HSI to the outbound and it will fly this leg change. I'm going to zoom out here on my scale so we see what's going on. There, it just sequenced to my outbound leg. Now we're going to go outbound 1 minute to do the procedure turn. If I zoom out a little farther, I can even show you the protected airspace. It even maps that out for you so you know where you're safe. Also, normally you go outbound 1 minute. If I go over here to my main nav page, I can look here, my estimated time en route. Since I'm not navigating to a point anymore, it started to timer outbound. So we've been outbound 35 seconds. But I don't need to do that because the unit's going to tell me when I've been out a minute and I need to start my outbound on the procedure turn. At this point on the procedure turn, it says start procedure turn. You would go to heading mode on your autopilot or you'll hand fly the pictorial. Just like on the holding patterns, the procedure turn is scaled based on your ground speed to be 1 minute. So at this point, it was outbound, and you noticed our desired track, or our course outbound, was 176 degrees. And CDI needles coming off. And here's our distance from our final approach fix also. 2.7 miles from waypoint Herb. Now, when I've gone outbound about a minute, we go ahead and speed this up a little bit. I go ahead and make my turn inbound. You're going to notice halfway around my turn inbound, it's going to sequence to the inbound course on that approach. Next desired track 356, and I can couple my nav to it. Again, look at that picture. It's kind of like the olden days when I was learning to fly. They sat there and said, if you peeked out the window while you're doing instruments, 1 peek is worth 1,000 scans. Now this is worth at least 500 scans. We're coming inbound. At this point, it's just like our vectors to final. We're getting established. We're 3.3 miles out from our final approach fix. And if this had been a real unit, it would have switched to localizer if you had the proper frequency tuned in up here. So if you forgot to switch the GPS switch, it would do it automatically. Now we just fly this down just like we did before. Now we're coming up on the missed approach point. I'm about, just coming up on a half mile out. And we might try a different scenario this time on the missed approach. Let's say, hey, we've tried a couple times going into executive, we just don't see the runway. So we're going to try an ILS at a different airport. So we're going to do one of the more complicated things, but it's not with this box. So we come up to the missed approach point. Boom. At that point, it would sequence us out to the missed approach hold. I'm going to put it in GPS mode now. But that's not what we're going to do. We talk to the controllers, say, hey, we're going to go ahead and try an ILS approach at Kansas City Downtown Airport now since we can't get into executive. So again, we just go direct to. And again, in this case, you press direct to twice because it wants to take you out to the missed approach hold point. With the little knob, scroll in your identifier again, your letters and your cursor position. And you can put in, we're going to go to MKC, KC, enter, enter. Now we're flying to that airport, but they're giving us a vector at this point. They're saying fly heading 360 vectors for the ILS runway 3, Kansas City downtown. So again, all you do is go procedure, select approach, enter, ILS 3, vectors to final. And in this case, they're vectoring me already. I'm going to activate it. Little disclaimer, it tuned in the localizer for me, and we're set. I press flight plan. That's it. It looked like a bunch of button pushers. I bet I can do that 10 times faster than you can switch in your approach plate and dial in all your frequencies manually and know where you are with that approach. So we're 10.5 miles out from Norge. Come over here, our desired track. Our inbound is 030, and we're about 2.5 miles from intercepting the localizer because my CDI is deflected 2.5 miles. So things start happening pretty quick. Once you get it mapped out and you see where you're at, it's a piece of cake. Now I've got us flying back into Johnson County Executive. Let's say this time the localizer's out and radar control, so our only option is doing the GPS approach into the airport. Same thing, we want to shoot a GPS approach. We go to Procedure, select Approach. Again, put the big knob, scroll down. I want to do the GPS 3.6 this time. Press Enter. Now it gives us our selection of vectors or which initial approach fix we want to go to. In this case, actually this is the most difficult part of GPS approaches, is pronouncing these names. I'm going to call it Okud, and we'll highlight it, press Enter. Now again, it's asking us to load it or activate it. Let's say they haven't cleared us for it. Press Enter. Notice this time, since it was a GPS approach, it didn't give me the disclaimer. GPS is going to be your primary means of nav on this approach. So we're still flying direct OJC, but we've got the approach loaded up in our buffer zone. So now as we're flying along, and they give us those magic words, Mooney 430 Golf, you're cleared for the GPS runway 36. The only thing I have to do is go Procedure and Enter. Now this approach is laid out in a standard GPS T. All you got to do is, again, follow the magic magenta line. It's going to take us to the initial fix, then it's going to take us up here to an intermediate fix, to our final fix, and down to our missed approach point. And again, I'll declutter the map. So again, just follow the box, and we don't have to touch anything else on the box. It's all going to happen in sequence automatically. Now you can see we're nearing our initial approach fix. Again, this is going to work just like on the other approaches. We're going to get our turn anticipation. We're moving along here at 162 knots. And we're a half mile out. It's telling us next desired track, 86 degrees. And go ahead and turn to 86 degrees right when it tells us to. And it sequences to our next line. This next leg is a 90-degree turn. Turns like this are when turn anticipation comes in real handy. You can make such nice, smooth intercepts to the next course. And just fly along and follow what the box says. Now we're coming up to our intermediate point, Mara. Again, I guess I'm pronouncing that correctly. If you can pronounce these GPS waypoint names, you're better off than I am. Next desired track, 356. And again, what's it going to tell us in a few seconds? It's going to tell us to turn to 356 so we can cut that corner in nice. Again, this is so much easier than conventional approaches. With this box, everything's the same. It should take the fear out of doing them. A GPS approach is as easy as shooting a localizer or ILS approach. And we come in, you can see us turning the corner. When we're halfway through the turn, it's going to sequence us to our next leg. And there we go, to our next leg. And again, desired track is 356, that's our inbound. And just like on the localizer, we'll fly it the same way. It'll sequence us down, and our needle sensitivity, once we're 2 miles out from Herb, the final approach fix, will go to 1/3 of a mile. So it almost looks like we're shooting a localizer. We're flying a very sensitive needle down to the runway numbers. So just keep the needle centered, and you'll make it to the airport. Now you'll see we're getting close to our 2 miles from our final approach fix. Right when we hit 2 miles, over here, it'll go from the terminal phase to the approach phase of flight. There, it just changed, it highlighted. So the approach has gone active. If If I come over here to my CDI page, look over here where I was telling your needle deflection. Notice it's a 0.9, 0.8. It does a slow transition from a 1 mile CDI to a 1/3 mile CDI. So that way, if for some reason you're off course a little bit, if you notice the way I'm flying it here, I'm never off course. But let's say you're off course a little bit, because I never would be. You wouldn't get the needle to slam over as it transitions down. So it's a smooth ramping down to a 1/3 mile. So once we cross the final fix, it is a 1/3 mile CDI. Now we drop the gear. We're going down to MDA and to missed approach point. The missed approach point will be at 0 DME, just like on all the other approaches. So you don't have to worry about timing or anything else. You know exactly where you are. Now real quickly, I want to show one last approach, and that's the old DME arc approach. We've got one set up. We're going to go into Topeka, Kansas. So I'm flying direct to Topeka right now, and I want to load up the GPS VOR runway 22 approach. So I go Procedure, select Approach, again with my cursor, scroll down which approach I want to do. It's the VOR 22, and which initial approach fix do I want to go to? I'm going to intercept it from the east side, so I want to intercept it on this radial. So I press Enter. Then it asks us if we want to load it or activate it. Let's say at this point in time, they're already clearing us for the approach. So we'll go ahead and activate it. So now I've got the approach set up, and we're going to the initial approach fix. And I'll let you see on the map what it's doing. But let's say in this scenario, they're giving me vectors onto the arc. Sometimes they'll say fly a heading, intercept the arc midway through. So that's the trick. It's real easy for going to the initial fix. You go to the initial fix and you'll intercept it and fly the arc around. Everything will happen just like on the other approaches. But so we want to intercept this course line. Let's say they're saying fly heading 210. I'll go ahead and give it a little bit of speed here. We'll go fairly slow with it. And all you have to do is go back to your flight plan, turn on your cursor with the big knob again, scroll down, I highlight DME arc, and that's what I want to do. I intercept the DME arc. So I just press direct to. Notice here it even says activate the DME arc on that leg. Enter. Notice the arc is now magenta. So I'll just fly that heading, intercept the arc, and everything else will happen just like on the other approaches. One other side note. The arc is actually given course guidance around it, so if you're flying coupled to an autopilot, it will fly the curve of the arc. Now we've taken a sample trip and flown a few approaches. Let's get into some of the bells and whistles and other features that you can do with the box. One important key that I made reference to a few times is the menu key. Basically, menu is your friend. If we're on the nav page, I press menu. All the fields that come up here have something to do with the page that I'm on. Right here it says change fields. If I press enter, notice it highlighted one of the data fields. You can configure these any way you want. Like over here in the corner, I like to have a thing called vertical speed required. So I highlight it. Notice I took the outer knob, cursor knob, highlighted the field I wanted to change. Now with the inner knob, I open up that data field. So I turn it, and here are all my selections I have. So you configure this box exactly the way you want. And actually, I'll keep scrolling down till I get to vertical speed required. And when we talk about VNAV, I'll get into that field a little bit more. When I'm done changing those fields, I press cursor and it turns off the highlighter. Let's go over to the map page and I press menu. Notice it's a whole new selection of menu items. So first one is set up the map. Let's look at that real quick. I press enter. Again, with the big knob, I can scroll down the list and the little knob will open up a subfield so I can look at and change it. Right now I've got orientation track up. If I take the little knob, open it up, you may prefer the map to be north up. If I do that, you just saw over here on the left that the map changed north up. But I'm going to go back up to track up. Things like earlier, I had auto zoom off, or you can turn it on. Right here's your selector. So that means the closer you get into an airport or a waypoint, it expands automatically on the map. You can set up this unit exactly the way you want. Some of the other functions you have here are airports. You could sit there and say what scale you want them to appear. Like right here, it says large airport, medium. That means how big is the text on the actual map, and the range. Again, I take my big knob, scroll over, I highlight range, the little knob. I can put in what range that I want to appear at. So right now at 150 nautical mile scale, that means if I scale out anything over 150 nautical miles, I won't see that airport. Anything below 150 miles and below, I will see it. And you can do the same thing with intersections, NDBs, whether you want to see them on the map or not. I have them turned off on my unit, but some people like them down at a lower scale. So you can configure this exactly the way you want. When you're done, clear key. So let me look at some other menu options here. That set up the map. Measure distance. I could actually measure between 2 points on the map. I wanted to see how wide a lake is. I could point to both sides of the lake and highlight it. Data fields off. If I press enter, notice the data fields I had on the side are off and I have a full map. If I go back to menu, it says data fields on. Press enter, I've got them back on. If I go back to menu again and I wanted to change those fields, I could press enter, and just like I did on the nav page, you can highlight which field you want to change, and then with the small knob, open up the window and make your selection. When you're done, you can hit clear and turn the cursor off. Again, if you're in one of these subfields, if all else fails, hold that clear key down. It'll take you back to nav 1 and get you out of all those submenus. So don't be afraid of that menu key. And again, remember it's page specific with the menus. And you're going to see that some more when we get into flight planning. You'll use the menu key quite a bit in that to enter a flight plan and to activate a flight plan. Now, kind of with the same idea, let's go look at the aux pages, because that's another area you can change the configuration and look at some other items. So let's go to aux page, take the big knob, and remember that's our third chapter over is aux. And we have things in here like fuel planning, trip planning, density altitude, true airspeed calculator, kind of your E6P functions, scheduler, some different types of functions here. And we'll kind of start at the beginning. Fuel planning. You could sit there and put in 2 waypoints, say I'm going from Wichita to OJC, and I've got 77 gallons of fuel on board, and my fuel flow is 14 gallons an hour, I'm going 130 knots. It'll tell me information down here, like it's 15.7 gallons for the trip is required. When I land, I'll have 61.1 gallons on board, and I got 4 hours and 22-minute reserve. I think I've got a good chance of not running out of fuel on this trip. So that's the type of things you can do with the fuel planning. Same thing, if I push cursor, it'll get me out of fuel planning. I can take my big knob again and scroll down, and I can go to trip planning. And it'll give me information like the course line, desired track on that same trip would be 54 degrees, 146 miles, and it would take me 1 hour, 7 minutes again. Now let's go down and look at the density altitude page. My big knob, I highlight it, press enter. This is kind of nice. You can calculate what your true airspeed is and what the winds aloft are, but you kind of have to go in and fill in the blanks. First you put in your indicated altitude, then what's your indicated airspeed, calibrated airspeed off your airspeed indicator, the current baro pressure, your outside air temperature, and your heading. Once you put in all that information, it'll calculate down here what your density altitude is, what your true airspeed is, and the wind direction and speed, and what your headwind or tailwind component is. Now, if I come down here, there's scheduler. That's kind of a neat little bonus function. You can put little messages basically to yourself inside the GPS. Like right here, you'll see at the top, I have an oil change. I could sit there and say every 50 hours, I like to change the oil. So I'd go ahead, and say, yeah, it's a one-time warning, and at 50 hours, using the outer knob and the inner knob, you put your time in. So I'll go 50 hours there. And it'll tell me, come up with a message 50 hours later that the unit's been operating, say it's time to change your oil. And I've put some other things in too. Transponder due. Well, my transponder's due in October of 01. And so I'll have a message come up on that date. So it's just kind of a neat little bell and whistle item with the unit. Now I'm done with this page. I'm going to turn off my cursor, click the small knob over, and look at some of my other utility list. Right here I can do checklist. I can actually put in a checklist for my aircraft. Flight timers. This is kind of nice. You can do a count up timer or a count down timer, but it'll also tag the time that you take off. The defaults out of the factory are when you hit 30 knot ground speed, it'll start the flight timer, and when you get below 30 knots, it stops the flight timer. So it'll tag the exact time that you depart, and it'll also give you the time that you've been in the air. So I'll just push cursor and get out of that. Trip statistics. That'll give you information like a trip odometer, your average ground speed, an odometer, some things you never knew before. Again, to reset that, menu is your friend. So I go to menu, and then I can reset all the information on my tripometer, or I can come down here and reset all. So that's what that page is. Rain prediction. That'll tell me, calculate if I'm going to have enough satellites in view to do a GPS approach at my destination airport. Right now, that's really not a problem because the way we have the constellation set up and there's actually a few extra satellites up there, we're getting fantastic GPS coverage. And then sunrise, sunset. Your flying airplane doesn't have lighting or you're not comfortable flying at night, you can get the exact sunrise and sunset at any location. We'll come over to our next page. Airspace alarms. I'll go ahead and turn that on. What that'll do is give you a warning before you're going to enter airspace. So we have the factory defaults turned off, basically because you can see on the map when you're going to enter airspace ahead of time. But if you're not comfortable with that, you could put a warning for every time you get close to a restricted area, it'll start flashing a message. So that's where you turn that on and off at. CDI alarms. You can actually set the CDI to be automatic, like I did when I was en route. I was at 5 miles when I was in the terminal area. It went to a 1 mile full deflection CDI, and when you're shooting approach, it goes down to a 3rd mile. You can set that to auto, or you can manually set it to a set scale. And here's the ILS CDI selection. Remember when I was saying it'll automatically kick it from GPS to localizer once you're a mile from intercepting? That's where you turn that on. If you don't want to have that feature, you can turn it off. I can't imagine not wanting it. And the units and automag, you could switch things from nautical miles an hour to statute miles an hour, from feet to feet per minute, those types of adjustments to the unit. So you do that right in those pages. And map datum and position. Actually, on these, I wouldn't get into it and change it unless you know why you're doing that. Very seldom you need to get in and change that information. Now, date and time. The GPS knows the date and it knows Zulu time, and it syncs up with the clocks and the satellites. So what you'll want to do for whatever area you're in, you can actually set an offset. So right here where we're at, we're 5 hours behind Zulu time. So that's how you set that. So if you're on the East Coast or West Coast, you can set it appropriately to see your local time. And last, and probably not least, probably the most important one, is the display. If you press display, lots of times at night, people have had trouble. It's a photocell dimming on the unit. Well, if you've got a glare shield light that hits the top of the unit will balloon out and it's way too bright at night. So you can come to aux page 4, go to display, and switch it from auto to manual, press enter, and then with the control knob, little knob, you'll be able to control the brightness of the display, and you can dim it down farther than it does automatically. And same thing, if you're getting some washout on the unit, it looks a little faded, you can adjust the contrast and play with that also. That one's real important to know. Nearest airport criteria, that's basically just to set what length of runways you want in your emergency list. So when you go to nearest, if you're flying a 727, you probably don't care about strips that are under 4,000 foot long, so you'd make minimum length of an airport 4,000 foot. So you don't show anything under that. And then COM configuration. The only thing there is this COM can actually have 8.33 megahertz spacing for use in Europe. So you can switch it from 0.25 to 8.33 spacing at this point. And that is a quick rundown of all the aux page menu items. Now let's look at another scenario. Instead of flying from Wichita direct to Johnson County Executive, let's say we want to follow a flight plan and fly the airways between Wichita and Executive. So what we're going to do is start at Wichita Airport. We're going to go to Wichita VOR, Victor 12, up to OJC VOR, then up to OJC the airport. So to do that, we want to go into flight plan. Now when we press flight plan, you'll see there's two flight plan pages. The first page you hit is flight plan, look up here in the corner, 00. That's our active flight plan. That one's more in a volatile flight plan. Anytime you activate a new one, it'll erase your old one. So that's the one you're actually flying right now. And if you want to store flight plans, it's a trip you're going to take over and over again, you can store it on flight plan page 2. Again, the small knob, one click to the right. If it's a flight plan you're going to use over and over, go ahead to flight plan page 2. You would press menu. Again, menu is your friend. And it comes up with create new flight plan. You'd press enter and then start scrolling in the waypoints. In this case, I'm only taking this trip once, so I'm not going to waste it in a stored flight plan. I'm going to do it in my other flight plan, in my active flight plan. So I can press clear or cursor. Actually, in this case, it's cursor. Then click one, click to the left, and we're back into our active flight plan. If you look, it already has Wichita in there, the airport. If you want to create a flight plan in your active flight plan and you haven't done a direct to, it'll put in your departure airport automatically. So we save you one button step. So now I want to add on to it. I want to go to Wichita VOR, then up to Emporia, and build the airway in there. So I press cursor and just start scrolling it in. Wichita VOR is ICT. So VORs don't have the K in front of it like the airports did. ICT. Then it drops down to the next waypoint, and it's going to be Emporia VOR. That comprises the airway. And you can go back or forward with the cursor. Emporia. Now we're going to do OJC VOR, which actually is on the field at Executive. But we'll do the full route in here. And this one has a duplicate waypoint. There's two waypoints in there. There's also an OJC VOR in Japan. I don't think we want to go to that one. We'd notice we're a little off course if we're going to Japan. And probably have to get some fuel between here and there. Then we put the airport in, which will be KOJC. Okay, now we have our flight plan in. With the cursor on and the big knob, again, I can scroll down the list. And we can look what's happening. Right now, we're going to fly from Wichita Airport to Wichita VOR. And notice it's a leg in between there. If I turn my cursor off and press flight plan, we'll see it on the map. And there's a whole route going up to Olathe, Kansas. So let's say we're taking off and we start flying. Let's look at a couple different scenarios. We're flying to the VOR Put that in the clearance. All of a sudden they say, Mooney 430 Golf, fly heading 360 to intercept Victor 12. Okay, how are we going to do that? We're going to fly a heading. So you go to heading mode on your autopilot, and you've got to intercept this course line now. So what we'll do there, we're flying a heading to intercept a course. You go to flight plan. Turn your cursor on, and that leg of Victor 12 is between Wichita VOR and Emporia VOR. So I'm going to highlight my destination VOR on that airway, and I press direct to, not once, but twice. And notice it comes up with a box that says activate leg, fly leg Wichita to Emporia. Enter. So now, if we look at the map, and I'll zoom it in, get a little better picture of it. I'll actually declutter the map also. Look at it. You can see exactly what's happening. I'll give it a little more speed here. We're flying the heading that he's giving us up to intercept this airway. It's as simple as that. So you want to do that again, just go over it one more time, is go into flight plan, turn on your cursor, highlight the destination waypoint, direct to, enter. Anytime you got to fly a heading to intercept a course. Now let's do a different scenario. We're flying on, and before we get there, they say, you're cleared direct Emporia. Again, let's go to flight plan, turn on our cursor, big knob scroll. I highlight Emporia this time because I'm cleared present position direct to Emporia VOR, not the airway. I just press direct to, enter, enter. And now we're going present position, direct Emporia, and we'll pick up the rest of the airway from Emporia on into OJC. So there's a couple scenarios. Now let's do another one. Let's even get trickier with it. Let's say they give us an arrival. So they're going, I better go back to nav mode on my simulator, so it'll couple in here. Let's say they give me a scenario. They say, okay, expect the Jayhawk arrival into Johnson County. So they're going to give me a star into there. Again, what's a star? It's a procedure, just like an approach is a procedure. So we go to the procedure key, and it says select arrival. So I highlight that, I press enter. Which one are they giving me? The Jayhawk 3 arrival. Press enter. Now they're asking which transition on that arrival I'm going to use. Am I going to go Chanute or Emporia? Well, we know Emporia is on our route, so we'll highlight Emporia and enter. Now it asks us to load it into our flight plan. This doesn't give us a choice to activate it. We'll only load it into the flight plan. So now let's look at our flight plan. I turn my cursor on, and with the big knob scroll down, we're going direct to Emporia to OJC. Then after that, kind of in a different chapter in our flight plan, it has the arrival, the Jayhawk 3 arrival. The flight plan is going to sequence exactly like you see it here. If you wanted to pick up the arrival at Emporia, press direct to, enter, enter. Now you're picking up the arrival into OJC. Let's try one other scenario here. Let's say, as we're flying along, and we're stacking up all the worst case scenarios. Let's say you're cleared Inca, or I can't, again, these intersections and stuff, I guess it's INDIC intersection, and then you're cleared to Emporia. So I'd highlight the area where I want to insert that waypoint, which let's go over here to where ICT is, and just start scrolling in that identifier. And it's IND. I see. Okay. So I actually want it to go to that waypoint first, because that's what I was cleared to, direct to, enter, enter. Right. And now it will pick up, as we're saying, then I want to go ahead, it's got Wichita in there. I don't want that in there, so I'm going to go clear, enter, and remove it. Now everything's going to sequence to this intersection, and then it's going to go pick up our arrival. One last thing on flight plans are, again, don't be scared of that menu key. We press menu, and you have a whole list of options on your flight plan also. You can copy the flight plan. We just created one in the active flight plan. If you end up wanting to store it, you can copy it over to the other side into the stored flight plans. You can invert the flight plan, turn it around and fly it backwards. So look at some of those menu options on maybe your next trip. Now, I want to go over one more scenario. The OBS key. Haven't really talked about it yet. I'm flying up to Emporia VOR right now, and let's say they give me a clearance like hold northwest of Emporia VOR on the 330 degree radial. Well, how do you do it? The OBS key. And why we call it OBS is it actually ties in to your OBS needle. Whatever I dial here on the indicator, or if you've got a standard indicator or the HSI, displays out here on your map. You see that radial I just dialed in. So anything you spin here goes up here, transfers directly into your map. So actually, even though I'm navigating to a VOR, it acts just like a standard VOR. Now when I release the OBS, it retains that last radial I had. So once I come up here, I would intercept that radial and it would go to Emporia VOR, then follow on. If I just at this point want to go direct to the VOR, I can just press direct to, enter, enter. One last note, when I am in the OBS mode, one other thing happens. It will not sequence the waypoints along your route. So it holds waypoint sequencing when in OBS mode, and it gives you the ability to dial in radials. You may once in a while come up with this scenario. If I take it out of GPS mode and it's VLOC mode, it can't read the resolver or what I have dialed in here on my indicator. So if you go to OBS mode in that case, you'll manually have to come up here with your cursor knob and dial in the radial that you want. Then when you're done, you just press OBS and it says cancel OBS, yes, press enter. Now we're flying a flight plan, and if you look at your main nav screen, we've got our distance to our next waypoint. That would be Emporia right here, 66.8 miles, and our time en route is 34 minutes and 43 seconds. Now that's to our next waypoint, but we want to know what the time and distance is for our complete trip. To do that, you can go to Flight Plan. Right here we're showing desired track and distance. You can change those fields, just like anywhere else. Go to Menu. With the big knob again, we scroll down to Change Fields, press Enter, and decide which field you want. With the little knob, we open up that subfield. Right there we have cumulative distance. If I press Enter, it'll show me. I can now leave that as my field, and anytime I want to know my total distance to destination, I look down at the bottom. OJC, it's 140 miles. If I wanted to make that my estimated time en route, see what my total time is en route, again, I'd go to Menu. I can change fields. And we just go to Estimated Time en route. And that'll give us to each leg and our total time. At this speed of 115 knots, it's going to take us 1 hour and 12 minutes. Again, you have the flexibility to configure these pages just the way you want. Earlier in the video, I had mentioned vertical speed required as one of the data fields that I like. On the main nav screen, I'm showing it right here. That's our VNAV function. If on the 430 you go to your last nav page, take the little knob all the way to the right, you'll see the setup for it. The best thing with this VNAV is it's a passive system. Basically, I'm flying Mooney airplanes here at Garmin, so I like to be at pattern altitude. The factory defaults are 4 miles out. I like to be at pattern altitude about 3 miles out. So I like to be 1,000 feet, pattern altitude, above waypoint. That would be whatever waypoint my destination waypoint is. And with the little knob, I can change my position here to 3 miles. Well, that's pretty consistent. Almost every airport I'm going to, I want to be at pattern altitude 3 miles out. Now I don't have to do anything else with this VNAV. If we go back to the main nav page, I can just hold the clear key down and do that. As I'm flying along, the GPS knows my altitude. The GPS knows the elevation of the airport I'm going to, and it can automatically add that 1,000 feet and the 3 miles out. So as I'm flying along, just really enjoying the day, I can look here, vertical speed required. Right here it's telling me I need to descend 300 feet per minute. So what I'll do is I'll just fly along. When I see that thing get close to 500 feet per minute, I'll just start down. If I pick up a little speed on the way down, it'll go to a little bigger number, tell me to go 500 or 600 feet per minute. If I throttle back or slow down a little bit, it'll go to a smaller number. But it's a fantastic function. I do recommend trying it out. Once you set it up and look at it, you'll understand what it's doing. Now, VNAV doesn't limit us for crossing restrictions. Let's use another example. They say cross Jayhawk at 8,000. Well, that was part of one of the intersections in my arrival. So I'll go over here to my VNAV page. Again, activate my cursor. They say cross Jayhawk at 8, so I want to put 8,000 in. I press enter. Now with the little knob, I'm doing this crossing MSL. So that's above sea level. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the 3 miles in there, so that way I'm down a couple miles before I get to the intersection, so I make sure I am safe on the crossing. Then I come over here with the little knob again, open up the field, and it's got all the waypoints that are in my flight plan. So I press Jayhawk, enter. Now it's set. Again, I can hold that clear key down. This is telling me the rate of descent I need to make that crossing restriction. This should be pretty easy. It's 85 feet per minute. So I'll just fly along. When that gets closer to 500 feet per minute and I'm ready to start down, I just go down at the rate it's telling me. We've been talking about the GNS 430. Now's our opportunity to show some of the differences between that and its bigger brother, the GNS 530. Operation, you're going to see, is nearly identical between the two boxes. But with the larger screen, we do get the opportunity to display a few more things. The first thing you'll notice is nav page 1. This is our CDI page, equal to CDI page on the 430. If you look at the bottom, we still have our CDI like the 430, but we got this nice big arc on top. That arc's based on our ground track, the direction we're going. This little caret is our bearing to the station. So basically, if you put that caret on top of the screen, you're going to get straight to where you want to go. We've got data fields in the corner here too. There's our course, it's 58 degrees, and we're going across the ground at 58 degrees, so we're right on course. We're 71.9 miles out and doing 138 knots and 31 minutes away. So this gives us more of an EFIS-looking type display. The other neat thing with the 530 is it is a higher resolution display than on the littler brother, the 430. Something else you'll notice too on the 530, we've got our COM and our nav, but we've got an extra data field down here on the side. Right now, in the factory defaults show a radial. That radial is based on what VOR you have dialed in. Right there, 113.8 is Wichita VOR, so we're off the 58-degree radial of that VOR. If I flip it, 112.8 is Emporia VOR, and that shows our radial off Emporia VOR. If you have later software, you will actually see the identifier of the station, the radial, and the distance. So, and if you have older software, you can go to your avionics shop and get it upgraded for free. Now, let's look at some of the other differences. Besides nav page 1 being the arc view, nav page 2 will be a map just like we're used to. You'll notice down here we have an extra button, the VNAV button. Instead of going to your last nav page on a GNS 430, you just press VNAV on this box. They operate and function just the same. One last thing I want to show is on this data field box, if you want to change the information in there, you actually go to your aux page, number 3, turn on your cursor, and you'll see down at the bottom, data field configuration. Press enter. There I've got it as VOR radial, and I could make it configurable data fields. If I do that, I can go up and highlight that area with the little knob, open up the field, and I have the choice of displaying whatever I would like. The other nice thing with the GNS 530 is going to be the future enhancements or add-ons to this. These boxes are actually multi-function displays. I know we do all these other functions, but we'll still show lightning data from a BF Goodrich WX500. You can show traffic on the map from a BFG Skywatch or the Ryan TCAD. In the future, there's going to be NextRad radar uplinks you can display on our maps. The 430 will also do it, but with the big display, and it is a higher resolution display of the GNS 530, it looks fantastic. I hope you have a better understanding of the GNS 430 and 530, its capabilities and its operational aspects. For more in-depth training on it, definitely refer to our pilot's guide. If that doesn't answer all your questions, you can reach us online and email us, or call our technical support at our 800 number. From all of us at Garmin International, we want to thank you for your support of our products. We feel privileged to be your avionics company.